Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third and final day of NASIG Autumn. We're going to give folks a couple moments to log in, and then we'll begin with our 2 p.m. session. Okay, welcome back to NASIG Autumn. It's wonderful to see you all back for another day of wonderful sessions. My name is Courtney McAllister, and it's my pleasure to kick us off with our first session of the day. We have two medium-length presentations for this block, so we'll have two sessions of 15 minutes each with Q&A at the end. Please put any questions to our presenters in the chat or Q&A feature of the Zoom session, and we'll have discussion afterwards. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our first presenters, Matthew Jabali and Susan Vandegrift. Over to you all.
Hello and welcome. This presentation is called Tapping In, Effects of an Equitable Access Textbook Program on Library Collections and Services. My name is Matt Jabali. I'm the Electronic Resources and Serials Librarian at the University of Colorado Springs. I use he, him pronouns. I'm joined by my colleague, Susan Vandegrift, who is a Scholarly Communications Librarian at UCCS, she, her pronouns. So a year ago, I had never heard of an Equitable Access Textbook Program. Bookstore bought or sold books and students bought them. The library was involved in textbook affordability efforts, but not different than any other academic library, really. A year later, though, our library is navigating its first semester under an equitable access textbook program. And the library was not really involved in deciding to use this program, but we have been watching it closely to see how it will affect our services and students and faculty that we serve. This presentation shares our initial thoughts on the findings as our campus progresses through its first semester on the plan. We hope that if a year from now your campus has started an equitable access textbook program, you'll have a better head start in thinking about how it would affect your libraries and users. To start, what is an equitable access textbook program? Well, instead of the students purchasing each required textbook, either through their bookstore or on their own, they can pay a set amount to receive access to all their textbooks and course materials, no matter how many or how few they are assigned. Participation is generally voluntary, leaving students to decide whether to take the deal or to go it on their own. There are some variations on these programs. Expense varies by campus, and there's generally either a set price per student or amount per credit hour. Although participation is generally voluntary, programs differ by whether students opt in or opt out, and whether they opt in or out for individual courses or for the whole semester. Finally, there's some variation of what students get for their fee. Do they receive access to printed textbooks if that's what they prefer? Do they get to keep the textbooks or just get a rental? Or if it's an ebook, will they maintain access after the semester's over? Before going further, I want to make it clear that I'm not going to make a judgment in this presentation about whether equitable access programs, or specifically the one adopted by UCCS, are good or bad, but I will acknowledge that they are controversial. Vendors and administrators who have advocated for these programs, of course, think they're great. Vital Source, a company that offers equitable access textbook programs, says equitable access offers a solution to the unpredictable costs of course materials and ensures financial barriers do not keep students from pursuing their collegiate goals. Meanwhile, other groups like that advocate for open resources, like Spark and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, are skeptical of these programs, with the EFF calling the textbook model inequitable access, an anti-competitive scheme by textbook publishers.
Yeah, so to talk specifically about UCCS's Equitable Access Plan, it's called TAP, which stands for Textbook Affordability and Access Program. And I will just say, because I'm sure we're going to use the language at some point, the marketing around this has used the phrase tapping in or tapping out to describe opting in or opting out of this program. And for our specific iteration, students are automatically opted in, meaning that students would have to take action if they wish to acquire the materials in some other way. So our program doesn't cover extended studies or non-credit courses, and also it doesn't require anything but required materials. So if a professor submitted materials as optional, those would not be included in the student's fees, and the student would have to acquire those materials again some other way. One of the selling points of our plan is that it's meant to provide day one access, meaning students would be guaranteed to have their books by the first day of class. It anecdotally doesn't sound like that's totally worked out for this semester, but to be fair, it was our first time having this program in place. 79.9% of students did choose to remain opted in during fall of 2023. And in terms of how this practically works for the students, they're paying a flat fee of $22 per credit hour, regardless of what the materials for that class cost. And we're going to look more at how that works on the next slide. But the other thing to know is that students must opt in by semester. You're either all in or out. Our bookstore also no longer sells books, so if students do not choose to tap in, they are wholly responsible for sourcing that material. So here we have 3 hypothetical students and the cost comparison for them to get their materials via TAP or on their own. Now, each of these students is taking 3 classes with 3 credit hours per class, meaning their cost within TAP is the same. And so for this nursing student, this is a really good deal. TAP is significantly cheaper than buying the 4 expensive textbooks they would have needed for this semester. For our undeclared freshmen, it's a pretty okay deal. It might have been slightly cheaper to opt out, but the student could even consider that small extra cost for using TAP kind of a convenience fee for not having to go and hunt down all of these materials themselves. And meanwhile, for our geography sophomore, this isn't a very good deal at all. Despite having free materials like OER or not even needing materials for one of their classes, this student is still paying $22 per credit hour for all of those courses. And again, you have to opt in or out by semester and not course. So the freshman can't simply pay $66 for that expensive bio textbook and then get their cheaper books for themselves. They either have to be totally in with the program or totally out.
All right, there are many textbooks, paths to textbook affordability that predate TAP, and our library made contributions to many of these. First, there are initiatives based around print books and copyright exceptions based on first sale. If you own a print book, you can do what you want with it. That means that libraries could check out books to students, usually putting textbooks on reserve so that more people could access them. Students can save money by buying used textbooks or selling their books when they no longer need them. There are also textbook exchanges where students can trade or donate books. For example, at UCCS, our Office of Veterans Affairs ran a program called Books for Battle Buddies, which offered military-affiliated students a way to trade and share textbooks. Second, our library sought to help libraries by licensing individual textbooks or textbooks collections when allowed by publishers, or if there were books that weren't necessarily textbooks but might be used for a course, for example, university press books, the library would license them at either the request of the faculty or proactively after finding them on a list of textbook adoptions. During the COVID closures, the library also started licensing streaming films for online courses when they were required. Finally, our library is involved in some open education resource, or OER initiatives. OERs are free and open course materials that can be shared, remixed, and reused freely. Susan will be talking more about our local OER initiatives, but librarians can be involved in the adoption, the promotion, editing, or even creation of OERs. We were interested to see how TAP would affect our efforts in these areas. First, in reserves. When we first heard about TAP, we wondered if it would diminish or even end the need for reserves. If everyone tapped in after all, everyone would have their textbooks on day one of class and no one would need reserves at all. On the other hand, if TAP were unpopular, we thought reserves might be in more demand. With the bookstore no longer selling textbooks, students tapping out might need reserves for immediate access. So far, though, we really haven't seen a strong pattern. There have been a few cases where students or faculty have been scrambling for materials that TAP failed to fulfill, and there have been a few cases where students have mentioned that they were opting out of TAP to save money and that they were relying on reserves as part of their strategy. But these issues aren't really new to TAP. Our reserves manager has told me that she hasn't seen a lot of change in reserves this year, and the numbers indicate that reserve checkouts are steady. In September, the first full month of the semester, reserve checkouts were down from last year, but still up from 2 years ago. We'll continue to monitor reserve patterns to see what happens as TAP matures. TAP has led us to reassess our electronic licensing of e-resources, particularly for textbooks and other course materials. For example, our library had subscription to Access Engineering, a database from McGraw-Hill that provides engineering books that are used by a few courses. If students are tapping in, does this subscription actually save any money? In theory, a student could tap out based on library access to the textbooks, but given that they're in other courses and you can't tap out for just one class, they'll likely want to tap in even if one course has no cost materials. We didn't cancel the database this year to avoid surprising students and faculty who might still be depending on it, but we'll likely cancel it next year. When I first heard that TAP would cover all required materials, I had hoped that I'd be able to dramatically reduce the number of streaming videos that we licensed for classes. My initial conversations with those administering TAP indicated that required videos would be in scope. So I started to draft an email to our regular requesters of streaming videos telling them that they should add them to their course adoptions to be covered by TAP. But then the TAP administrators told me that we probably shouldn't do this. They said that TAP costs were calculated based on prior years and that adding in a large extra expense might jeopardize things. So they said that at least for the first year, the library should keep doing what it was doing and license videos as we had. For single title ebook courses, I don't yet have much data. I've seen a few requests for single title ebooks come in and had questions about the number of seats that we have for other ebooks. So I know that some faculty are still planning to use library licensed ebooks next semester, but again, this could change as TAP matures.
And yeah, to talk about some of the local OER initiatives. So first, just to establish kind of Colorado's relationship with OER, as UCCS is a state institution. So Colorado Revised Statute 231134 requires public institutions of higher education to inform students which courses and sections use OER or other low-cost materials at the point of registration. So basically, students are able to make an informed decision about what classes they can afford to take, including the information about materials in that. And for these purposes, OER are defined as free materials, and low cost is being defined as $20 or less. I will also say the Colorado Department of Higher Education has had grant funding for higher education institutions to develop OERs and to promote OERs on their campuses. And UCCS has received over $80,000 in grant funding for OERs over the last 5 years. So in terms of how this is impacting OER at UCCS, because of how the TAP program is set up, it's a fixed price by credit hour, you're automatically opted in, and it is opting in by the semester, not the course. The state no longer actually considers us as having any free or low-cost courses at UCCS anymore, because theoretically, if a student took no action, they would be charged a minimum of $22 for even a 1 credit hour course that used entirely free materials. Additionally, the new 2023 RFP for state level grant funding for OER is restrictive for schools with equitable access programs. They're looking to disincentivize these. So instead of the institution getting to ask for a general pot of money to invest in OER, which is historically what we've done, basically to use it for stipending for faculty who create or adapt OER, now individual faculty and courses must apply specifically. Additionally, we've been warned we may be less competitive. One of the reporting details we've been asked to provide in the past is cost savings, which is now complicated because we can only calculate the money saved by the students who were enrolled in a course using OER and who chose to opt out of the textbook affordability program. So to wrap up, it's kind of interesting to note how TAP intersects with these other textbook affordability pathways. It really relies on the library's access to some content, as Matt mentioned, like streaming videos, and it relies on the use of free and low-cost materials and classes like OERs to keep the costs of the program overall down. However, it doesn't necessarily support these things, and in some cases, it actually disincentivizes other textbook affordability efforts. Low uses of library materials like course reserves or certain electronic resources may lead to the elimination of those options. And likewise, for faculty who are pursuing OER, and to be clear, there's many reasons to pursue OER beyond just cost savings. But if that was something that was important to faculty, if it no longer saves students money, it may not seem worth the effort. So our goal, again, as Matt said, is not really to advocate for or against equitable access programs in this talk, but simply to make other institutions aware of how it may intersect with or impact textbook affordability efforts already occurring on your campus. And we do have a list of resources for additional information and additional perspectives on this. And our slides, I think Matt has uploaded. Thank you all for your time.
Great job. That was really fascinating. Learned a lot, and that's a very complex puzzle you all are working with. As a reminder, please put any questions in the chat or the Q&A feature. Our next presenter is Jennifer Leffler. Are you ready to share your screen?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to share this presentation block with someone just a couple hours south in terms of institution location from me. So you're having a Colorado block this afternoon. The title of my presentation today is Applying Deselection Strategies to eBooks. And if you looked at Schedule, I added the question mark to the title that I was given by Schedule, just because this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and I wanted to share with the NASIG community and hope that we start some kind of conversation about these sorts of things, as I value what I've learned from NASIG in the past, and I know I will learn more going forward. All right, so I came to think about deselection and ebooks heavily in 2021. We had a new dean start here at the University of Northern Colorado in July of 2020, and she undertook a lot of new initiatives that reconceptualized how we thought about collections. There was a reorganization. On my slide, you can see that in April 2021, we started looking at print deselection. And then during that same fiscal year, we added a lot to our DDA program. We started an EBA program. There was money set aside in our collections budget to support some OA monograph collections, and we uploaded HathiTrust records into our catalog. So I was also new to the role of department head while all of these changes were happening, and so I had a new lens to look at collections and to really broaden my thinking about this. So the University Libraries Dean here at UNC developed a presentation for her and I to present first to University Libraries personnel and then to campus, and why deselection was an important part of libraries work. Systemic deselection program hadn't happened here at UNC for at least 30 years and probably closer to 50. So it was a new thing for our campus to think about. And while we were making these presentations, there was one line that really stood out to me, and that was this: to improve search results as a reason why deselection was important. And that line stood out to me because we were making some changes in the catalog. Talking about deselection of print things, we were talking about removing maybe a couple thousand books a month. That's our current rate with our deselection. And at the same time, we're adding hundreds of thousands of ebooks into the catalog. So if improving search was what we were talking about needing to do with deselection, other choices we were making were not having this happen. So you can see in my screenshot here, we have known overlay issues with some of our ebook collections. That's why there's 2 of the same title in this search result. We have some titles available on multiple platforms just because of how things are selected and received. And due to OA programs and some aggregator databases, there are ebooks that students and faculty have found that they want library help with that either we don't know about, we didn't know the books were there, we don't know access issues. And so there's some findability issues on top of ones that we already know about. So it was apparent to me that the systems we had in place weren't working as we kind of expected them to, and we might want to think about deselecting ebooks. So as our deselection group began meeting and discussing criteria and how our processes for our deselection and our collections, we did a lot of research about what was available on deselection, and a lot of materials, even like this one, it's on my desk right now, Right Sizing the Academic Collection, which was very helpful, did not mention anything about right sizing or deselection of e-materials. In fact, most of the mentions in weeding or deselection articles mention electronic collections as a reason to get rid of print collections. If you have online access to something, that's a way that you might be able to deselect some print. We as a group were able to develop very clear criteria to share with campus and personnel about what we were going to deselect from our tangible collections. Due to when we went up on our ILS, we have some metadata choices that we can use. So we could say anything that was in our collection before 1997 that hasn't checked out in that time and is available from a consortial partner will be evaluated for deselection. Those are very clear criteria. Most patrons and faculty members, even our undergraduate students, understand what those 3 things mean. And in thinking about clear criteria and our giant ebook collections, I couldn't come up with a way to develop clear criteria to explain how we would deselect ebooks if we were able to do so. Another roadblock in my thinking about deselecting DDA came when I was talking to a vendor, and it was specifically about DDA. And in thinking about how those books are shown to our patrons, I realized that we have records for our ebooks in OCLC, in our catalog, in our knowledge base for discovery, and in the vendor's administrative site for ebooks. So that is a much more complicated deselection process than it would be, or than it is for print. And so it was just another layer of the complexity of how we would be able to do this if we wanted to start deselecting ebooks. So I think many of us, when it comes to ebooks, have always just assumed that more is better. And I don't know that that's the case, but it might be. And I think it probably is a library by library decision. So there are definitely pros and cons to having a large number of ebooks. There's research that shows with DBA and EBA collections, our patrons use things that our selectors would have never purchased individually. And so that's new and exciting and a way for librarians to think about our collections in a new way. However, conversely to that, researchers, especially our new undergrads, can get overwhelmed with search results. Anecdotally, here at the University of Northern Colorado, we have a lot of first-gen students, and we also have a lot of students that have minoritized experiences. So we work really hard in the libraries to make those students feel welcome, to ensure that they understand that different ways of knowing and learning are important and valid. But in doing that, in trying to do that, we come up against systems like library catalogs, where they put in what they want to study in language that is probably not the best for a library catalog search. And then they're asked to choose between hundreds of thousands of things without any further knowledge of how to do that. And that can be a barrier to students and other researchers in trying to know how best to find what it is that they're looking for. The University of Northern Colorado Libraries are a member of the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries Consortium. So there are many ebook packages that are purchased at the consortial level. We love that we are able to do that. We are able to afford many things that our campus uses that we could not afford on our own, but we also have access to things that aren't a good fit for our campus. For example, there's a material science ebook package. We don't teach anything in material sciences, but because we've paid for the large package, we've always had those books visible to our campus. And so is that something that we can look at? And again, where is the financial decisions is also difficult. If you look at usage data and you're getting a very large package and you've got decent use, cost per use still looks good. Is that the right metric to use for ebooks? Again, I think that's something that we all struggle with or have to think about when we're thinking about deselection in ebooks. On the flip side of if more is better, if more isn't better, how do we decide what it is that we deselect? So many of us, when we think about deselecting our tangible collections, think about consortial or last copy considerations. With ebooks that are not lendable, are there those same kind of considerations? Do you look at your ebook holdings against whether or not you could ILL a print version? That sounds like a massive project, and I don't quite know how that would take over. I have a very small staff here, and the amount of usage data that we have, even title level data on all the ebooks to which we have access is huge. And I don't know how to aggregate that in a way that would help me make good decisions. Also, I think I said it earlier with the last slide, are we obligated to show everything that we receive through a consortial purchase? Or should I, as head of collections and discovery, make choices as to what is shown to our researchers? I also think about growing emphases on OA and OER and findability for those things. Is it incumbent on the libraries to show all the OA platforms, all the OER platforms that our campus might use? Or is our job once again changing and we work on findability for the things we purchase? So I think if more is better, there is definitely room for improvement. So if we decide to just keep going as we are, and all the ebooks to which we have access are shown, how do I train libraries personnel? What kinds of things are in which systems? How do we work with our instruction and teaching librarians to help students understand what is available, how to construct searches when there are just massive amounts of books available to them for their use? And again, professors the same way. There's just a scale change for especially some of our older professors and what's available to them. And so searching is a different sort of thing that we might need to work with them on. I'm also interested on the vendor side. Of course, many of our vendor partners are always looking for new things. sales is what they do. So they're releasing new products, even though many of us do not have extra money. And one of the things I've noticed is they're making giant packages based on specific topics, which might help the findability in very specific things like psychology or literature. However, we have a lot of interdisciplinary research that goes on. So if you're outside one of these kind of portal types, how do we help you find research? So there are a couple articles that I've found helpful when trying to think about deselecting ebooks. These are the two that I found. I'm sure there are more as I go on this journey, and I hope other people come with me or tell me something that might be obvious to you that isn't to me. And I look forward to making a collection that works best for my students and researchers. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I don't have a good way of replicating like digital applause, but many thanks to all three of you for wonderful presentations and sharing such great nuanced information with us. As a reminder, please feel free to put questions into the chat or the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we will, discuss your thoughts and questions. There's a lot to think about between our two presentations. So I'll just start us off with a question while people are refining their own. I'm curious, Jennifer, about the criteria for deselection of ebooks and whether subject plays a role in that. So maybe like for things that are related to technology or medicine, those could be weeded based on publication date, or that could be taken into consideration. Whereas maybe something in the humanities wouldn't necessarily have that as a piece of the metric. I'm curious if that has factored into your decision making.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then it's the implementation for me. That's always the fun part, so we get 300,000 books from this one package. So how do I tell my staff which ones are medical and which ones are, how do we run the list in our system that if this is in the URL and this is in the subject heading, then they can go. Conceptually, I think there's lots of really great ways to help. And then it's the implementation part that I always trip. Yeah, so and I think especially with like medical and tech stuff, there's almost an obligation to get the older stuff out, but how you do that is if somebody knows, please tell me.
Yeah, I think you make a really great point about how, with print weeding, you pull it off the shelf, right? You take your barcode out, you can physically remove it, but extracting it from these systems is a much different series of tasks. So lots of buried complexity there. Yeah.
Can I ask a question for Jennifer?
Of course.
Yeah. So I can think of at least two ways to weed too. Like there's a removal from discovery, or there's like an ask like to the vendor, like pretend like we never owned this book, to like remove our access for it. Have you considered both, or like how, if you can do one or the other?
Yes, we have considered both, and anecdotally, like I think it was probably 7 years ago, we asked a vendor to get rid of it was like the 1997 acronyms database, something like that. And it didn't go real well. And so I think that's the other thing, is that deselection for ebooks is not something that a lot of our vendor partners have thought about. We would like to get rid of these, and sometimes their response is, but why? So, and then, so if it's something we did really want to get rid of, is just hiding it in discovery and the catalog good enough, and you hope that nobody finds it and is like, why do you have this? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that conversation about is more always better is something that needs to kind of permeate different spheres of this equation. It's a really good point. We do have a question from chat. Anna Creech asks, how would you revise the TAP program to address some of the concerns regarding the intersection with other types of affordable textbook initiatives?
So to kind of speak to this from the OER side of things, one thing that would be really nice is if it was by course and not necessarily by semester. That's something where it really has flattened students' ability to kind of course by course make those decisions. And so until we can have like some completely OER degrees or programs, it's really hard for students to benefit from the cost savings of OER when those aren't necessarily tied to the course. Another thing that would just kind of be generally seen as better practice would be for us to have it be an automatic opt-out program, so that way students are actively making the choice to opt into it, as opposed to being automatically opted into it and perhaps not knowing how to get out of that program or not quite realizing that they are enrolled, even if they're getting their textbooks another way. So having it be a slightly more active choice by the students to participate in the program. And I don't know if Matt, if you've got anything.
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing. One of the things I say is that TAP has turned everyone into an amateur economist. So we all think that we know how to make it work. But the problem is, like, sure, you could make it better, but you might blow up the whole thing by accident, or the whole thing might just blow up either way. And so it's really hard to know, like, can we make a little adjustment to like maybe give credit if there's OERs, then you get a discount. Like that kind of stuff would be great, but whether it undermines the whole thing or not is really hard to tell.
Yeah, for example, I mean, like some of it depends. The number of students who decide to opt into this program are also what keeps the cost low for everyone in the program. And so they want as many students as possible to be opted in. And so there's kind of some things at odds with what might be working best for all of the students or for individual students. And so yeah, the math is really complicated.
Those are great answers. And thank you for the insights into your dance of potential unintended consequences. It's always good to see that thought process. We have another question from the chat. Deja Rubel asks, any advice for keeping up with edition swaps? I get a lot of why is this still here and wish there was a trigger when you purchased a new one. Standards and text rate comes close, sorry, by at least marketing the latest version. Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to think about. The other thing that I had never, this is again on the print side, but again, talking about editions is I was just going into our deselection like, hey, one of the things we could run is do we have multiple editions? And then we just get rid of older ones. And our head of interlibrary loan let me know that a lot of, one or two older editions get checked out. And, for like a sociology textbook that updates every year, that kind of makes sense. And so again, it was a nuance thing that she was offended is probably strong, but she really didn't want us to get rid of all old editions because some of them are still used. And then we had a really interesting conversation of whether that was good practice to send out the old ones or whether we needed to have some sort of automatic, if we buy the 7th, we get rid of the 6th. We haven't made that decision, but I think, yeah, we could probably build something that, yeah, hey, there's a new edition. We have the same thing, I think, with some print series. Did they write a new Captain Underpants? We would like the new Captain Underpants for a non-academic example. But those kinds of things, there's really, a lot of the times it's a student that like, you have the first 4 of these, where's the 5th one? And I didn't know they were out. And it happens with textbook editions too. I think it seems like you could build a system that does it, but I don't know how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to not answer your question, Deja.
It's a great question. Seems like it could be a good use case for alerts, which I know we've seen configured on a lot of other environments, but maybe something we could one day apply to this kind of process too. Great question and great answer. Thank you. Susan Davis has a question again for you, Jennifer. It's interesting that many libraries are concerned about perpetual access for electronic resources and seem less likely to want to weed those materials. Many of the constraints of print do not apply unless you are locally hosting. Have you discussed changing purchasing and or licensing guidelines? Maybe more preferences for subscription than ownership models?
Yes, we have talked about that. Our previous administrators pre-2020, if it didn't have perpetual access, we did not think about it at all. So that was one of the, when I talked about all the change, some of the changes that happened to rethink about our collections, that was one of them, is that we didn't need perpetual access to something necessarily to think about purchasing it. And so that, I think, was part of the explosion for us. And also as a mid-sized school, you know, we talk some, is preservation ever our issue? I think the issue about perpetual access, you know, the ARLs can't do it all by themselves, but again, how do we maybe beyond consortium, but all together? I can dream. Figure out who keeps what and how we do that. And on a side thing, having conversations with our IT on campus about, no, really, we do continue to need server space for an archive. That's what archives mean, is that you always need the server space. There's a lot of parts to this. And there'll be a lot more as we keep going. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. We have a lot of other great questions. I'm looking at the time. I'm like, I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of them, but hopefully at least one more. Have you also been thinking about deselection in terms of other one-time purchase materials that aren't necessarily book-based, especially in light of continuing access fees?
I have not, but I now have the new 2 o'clock in the morning thing that my brain will think about.
We all need good topics to ponder on long walks and things like that. Okay, let's see if we can find one more question here. Let's see. That's a comment. Okay, sorry, my cursor was being a little bit wonky. A question from Christina Torbert. For Jennifer, we've tried deduping ebooks on the front end, listing more of our subscription temporary ebooks as held in the vendor purchasing interface, trying to control which books appear in DDA or purchase requests, but big publisher collections are still problematic. So there's more of a comment than a question, but a very good one. And if you'd like to respond, please feel free.
Thank you. Yeah, I probably touch base. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we are at time. It went by very quickly. Thank you for a lively and very engaging discussion. Thank you to our wonderful presenters for sharing their work. A lot of complexity, a lot of moving pieces into what you both are doing at your institutions. So thank you for giving us so much to think about. We will have a brief break, a 10-minute break, and we'll be back here for the next round of sessions at 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, please stretch, enjoy some well-deserved caffeine if that's your fancy, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Thank you.
Try that again. Welcome back to the continuation of NASIG Autumn. This session block will consist of 3 short sessions, 7 minutes each, with Q&A at the end. We're very excited for yet another round of awesome presentations. As a reminder, please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A features in Zoom to post your questions to the presenters, and we'll have discussion at the end. We'll start with Catherine Green, and then we'll also have presentations from Ilda Cardenas and James Rhodes, respectively. It's my pleasure to kick things off with Catherine Green.
Hi, everyone. Good day. Thank you for attending my brief talk on artificial intelligence in a health sciences library. My name is Catherine, and I'm the Associate Director for Resources and Copyright Support at Dahlgren Memorial Library. So a little bit of background about DML is that it's a graduate life and health sciences library for the Georgetown University Medical Center, or GUMC. It serves a number of patron groups, such as the Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center, the Georgetown School of Medicine, the School of Health, the School of Nursing, an on-site hospital, a biomedical graduate school, and a cohort of residents. A brief overview of DML's resources. We have over 13,000 journals, over 6,000 electronic books, around 130 databases, and about 24 point-of-care tools. With the current uptick in interest in the topic of artificial intelligence, or AI, DML wanted to bring awareness to the library resources that were already utilizing AI technologies or powered by AI on the back end. Many users did not realize that the databases that they had been utilizing for years were already powered with some form of AI. So as we know, artificial intelligence is extremely broad. The analysis done did not focus on particular AI tools, however, such as ChatGPT, but on the different health sciences point-of-care tools that utilize the technology. So, for example, we have a resource that utilizes natural language processing software to extract key clinical features that include lab results, vital signs, and electronic medical record, or EMR, documentation. The gathered information is then placed into the product's differential diagnosis generator for the health sciences end user to manipulate. Additionally, AI-powered text and data mining for clinical support has been at the library's forefront for over 10 years. The Director of Clinical Integration Services and Data Discovery would utilize a text mining platform when regular searches would not be able to answer a clinical question to the level of specificity needed. Using natural language processing and machine learning, the tool would pull up much more granular results from sifting through the resources where this has been approved. Having and providing this information has helped with patient safety and care improvements. So at the time of the analysis, which was midsummer of 2023, there were around 24 databases for the point-of-care database type within DML's collection. The Associate Director for Resources and Copyright Support, or ADREX, worked on the back end to identify point-of-care tools powered by AI. A spreadsheet was then created that allowed the ADREX to easily keep track of which resources had information on artificial intelligence integration close at hand. For some of the resources, information wasn't as readily available. The resources that did not have this information at the ready required contacting technical support. Once the information had been gathered, the ADRACs used DML's database's A to Z tool in order to add artificial intelligence as a database type. This type was then added to about 11 current point of care tools managed by DML. For those 11 resources, the sentence, "This resource is powered by artificial intelligence," was added for further clarification in the description section. So as you can see here, we have an image of the final entry. And just for clarification, we do use SpringShare's LibGuide A to Z databases tool, where you can put in database types such as you see here, like artificial intelligence, as well as other things like the description as you see here. This resource is powered by artificial intelligence. So one vendor did reach back out to the resources team at the library just to learn more about the library's interests and to share the company's existing work. While the particular work was still in the beta stage and focused more on an out-of-scope area of study, it was still very intriguing. DML expects that more of these types of conversations and potential collaborations are anticipated in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Catherine. As a reminder, please put your questions for Catherine and our other presenters in the chat or QA, and we'll get to those at the end of this block. Ilda, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Let me, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me share my screen. And there we go. Welcome, everybody. This is my presentation titled Customer Service Opportunities in ERM Troubleshooting. A little bit about me. I am the Electronic Resources Librarian at California State University, Fullerton. I've been here for about 4 years now, and before this, I was a cataloging librarian at Mississippi State University, and then I came back to California. And so for today's agenda, I'll be talking about a little bit about ERM at Cal State Fullerton, my troubleshooting tickets at a glance, a little something I'll bring up about being lost in semantics. I'll explain later, and some recommendations for providing customer service to library users. So ERM at Cal State Fullerton, when I'm on the clock, troubleshooting takes priority. So as soon as I get a ticket, as soon as I see it, I answer it. And our tickets are now managed on SpringShare, because before they used to go to individual inboxes, and that wasn't really the best way to track them. It was hard to divide up the work when I was sharing this work with somebody else. And now that they're on SpringShare, I was able to, analyze the tickets that I have received. And CSUF is part of a consortia. So there are some locally managed electronic resources that I take the lead on. Whenever they have problems, I troubleshoot them on my own. but there are also tickets that there's really not much I can do because they are managed on a consortia level, so a level above myself, above me. And in order to maintain my sanity, if there's nothing I can do on my own to fix a ticket, I will just send it over to the chancellor's office, the consortia manager. And let's see. So last year, during fiscal year 2023, I received a total of 631 total troubleshooting tickets. And one of the reasons why I'm so happy to have our tickets on SpringShare is because I can see what was done to it, and I can present you with some pretty cool data. So 182 tickets that I received in fiscal year 2023 were, I suggested to the student that they request the item through interlibrary loan. It wasn't really a problem. 120 of those tickets, I told them to clear their browser cache. And that really wasn't a problem or anything to really troubleshoot. The link worked as it should. And then 66 of those tickets were related to open access resources, and there are some tickets that are, when you click on the link, you get sent to the journal homepage and you're not linked directly to the article. Again, this isn't really this doesn't really require any troubleshooting on my part. And so yeah. So this means that 58% of the tickets that I received last year did not require troubleshooting. And that's a big number. So it means that I'm spending a lot of my time on stuff that doesn't really need any problem solving, any sort of fixing on my end. And I've been really wanting to say this out loud a lot. And one thing that I feel about the tickets, the 58% of the tickets that I received that aren't really problems, is that I think our students are just lost in semantics. They are unsure how to use our discovery layer. They don't really know what they're looking at in front of them. And what I'm finding is that it's a best time for me to showcase my customer service skills. And let me backtrack. Early on in my career, I received a customer service training when I was a copy cataloger many years ago, and it was this video called "Give Them the Pickle," and it's about like how customer service is giving away pickles that don't really cost you anything in terms, like, if for a restaurant to give you a pickle, it's easy to just give them away. And so I have incorporated that into my work in ERM. So anytime I get a ticket, I try to treat them as if it is the first time I've ever seen the issue. And I'm also incorporating an observation that I did with at a public library when I was in grad school. I was talking to one of the librarians, and she told me that she's she has to treat every question at the library as if it's the first time she's ever heard it. Even the question, where is the bathroom? And so I bring that into my work because every 4 years we have new students come in. They're always changing, and they don't all have the same experience working with library resources. And so with ILL tickets, we have the Find It button. I think this is, I've seen this at other libraries where like you can be in an ANI database. It's not a full text database. And then we have our Find It button. They click on it and they get redirected back to our discovery layer. And when they're there, they see two things. They see a button that asks them to sign in, or the report, our troubleshooting form. And so I feel like when students see this and they see one of these two options, they'll just fill out the form instead of signing in. And I think that that explains my high number of ILL tickets. And I was getting really frustrated with all these tickets because they don't require troubleshooting. And so I brought it up to my colleagues in public services and the reference librarians, and I told them, like, your students are doing this. I don't think that they know how to use the Find It button. And then they told me, my colleagues said that from what they hear from students is that they're confused when they get to this page. Especially like sign in for more options, it kind of sets up the expectation that they will find a link once they sign in, and then they don't see it, and then they fill out the form. So although it is frustrating for me to spend my time answering tickets like this, I have to learn to be more empathetic to our students, and just having that sort of in my mind helps me help. Like, I'm just happy to help the student. And so I give them detailed instructions on requesting their article through interlibrary loan. And I always try to leave them with something. And so, yeah, I could just give them the link to the ILL form without any instructions, but I really try to make this a teachable moment, and I try to minimize having return offenders or not offenders, returning customers when it comes to these issues. And so quickly, for the problems that really aren't issues, the links are working in our discovery layer. The most simplest solution is to tell students to clear their cache, and the links will work again. And I've gotten to the point to where I don't give them the article PDF or a direct link to the article, because I want to make sure that they clear their browser cache. And one thing that I've been doing with them is I tell students, like, let's try this first together and see if this helps your issue, because I'm sure they see a broken link. And I just because I don't have a broken link doesn't mean that they're seeing the same thing that I am. So I feel like this has been working. I don't always get I don't have students yelling at me for that. And that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ilda. Greatly appreciated. Already a lively discussion happening in chat. Please keep it going. And James, are you ready?
I am ready.
Over to you.
All right, let me find my screen here. How's everybody doing? What a great conference, right? I'll do the applause. I just want to thank Courtney and the whole conference committee that's putting this event on. A lot of great presentations. So I'm just very appreciative, and I thank the committee for giving me an opportunity to actually speak today. And just to give you a little bit of context of what I do, I'm the Assistant Director for Continuing and Electronic Resources at Virginia Tech at the main campus in Blacksburg. And as I work with vendors, I thought, NASIG, maybe this is a place where there's going to be some vendors. So I thought, let us help the vendors a little bit by giving some observations that I've observed that I think might be helpful. So there we go. So today's goals, and I'm going to make it quick, I promise. I just want to define what I'm talking about when I'm saying challenging, getting challenging deals over the finish line. I'm going to talk about 3 examples, not really specific examples, and I'm not going to mention any vendors, I promise. And talk about ways to maybe make this easier if you're in a role where you're doing multiple things like I am. So what do we mean when we're talking about a challenge? A challenge can be defined as stimulating. Doesn't everyone enjoy some stimulation? If you're working with electronic resources, you're being stimulated. I guarantee that. Provoking. Provoking can be a good thing, but I don't think as many of us enjoy being provoked. And then we have what I really think are challenges, and those are the problematic ones. So that's what I'm really getting at today with this talk. So we've got different perspectives. We've got the vendor's perspective, and we've got the librarian's perspective, the person that's working with electronic resources. The vendor's perspective is they have a product that they want you to subscribe to, and they want you to use. And from the librarian perspective, we want a resource because one of our users may want that resource, whether it's a faculty member or it's students, or maybe it's the institute itself. So 3 examples that I think we've all run into, or at least one of the 3, working with electronic resources. The examples I'm going to talk about are licenses, payments, and access, because really that's the crux of the everything that we do, I think. So with a license, I'm not sure vendors really think so much about the license as in a sense that they have to be kind of unique to a state. So governing law, very important topic if you deal with licenses. You either need the vendor to remain silent or they need to adjust it to your governing law. Indemnification, say that 3 times fast. This is an issue, at least for where I'm located in Virginia, because the state law does not allow for indemnification within the contracts. Limited liability is another. And then also the idea of signatures. Sometimes you only have signatory authority to a certain extent. So if vendors can make it so we can just acknowledge it through an email, you're not really signing it. Of course, you're still agreeing, so keep that in mind. So the second thing are payments. Now, when I think about payments, this is just an example, and if this vendor's listening, they're going to know who they are. When you try to upsell us, don't do it when we've already initiated the payment process. Don't ask us to, or tell us you're going to sunset a product when we're in process of payment, because what will happen is in most universities or institutions, if you have that invoice, you're either going to have to pull that invoice back, or you're going to have the vendor actually adjust the invoice. And then you may end up with two purchase order numbers. It just creates a big mess. So, this is something to keep in mind. And there's all different ways, and there's so many people that are involved when we're dealing with payments. So I think, if the vendor can look at it from our perspective and we can look at it from their perspective, we're going to be better off. Access. This is a very important one. And this kind of could involve payment and the licenses, because I've found that access is a huge stumbling block, because what works best for us is if it's IP authenticated, because whenever we have to have the students use their email and register for whatever resource, and this happens a lot with business resources. So I really hope there's a business vendor on this call. The IP authentication is the preferred model. And you'll find that if you press the vendor, in some of my tips I'm going to share, they'll come around and you'll suddenly find out where they thought you couldn't get IP authentication or use an easy proxy, you actually really could. So what is it all about? How do we work together? It's through collaboration and communication, because there is a process that this all works. The vendor has to go through the librarian so the user can actually get what they need and be able to access it. So this is why the collaboration and communication is so very important. How can we make things more efficient? And what I mean by efficient, I mean easier for us and easier for them. Help us help you. We need to have frequent and honest communication with vendors. We need to let them know, hey, if we have to have users register and go through you, then we're talking about months and months and months of reviews, whether it's for FERPA, we're going to HECVAC. There's so many things. This entails security issues, accessibility. So it's a number of reviews, whereas if we can use IP authentication, it's much quicker. Consider both perspectives. The vendor is putting together licenses that are, blanket licenses. So, but you need to let them know that there needs to be adjustments made, whatever they might be for your state. And you should always strive for collaborative solutions. And that's why I think you need to really have open line of communication with the vendor, because there's lots of people involved with this, as we all know, lots of steps, lots of money, lots of time, and in most cases, it's for one resource. So I just encourage everybody to work and collaborate with your vendors, and keep in mind, as you see these around campus and around any place in the environment, these bumps sometimes really help us. So these bumps along the way of working with vendors, they might seem like challenges, but challenges can turn into advantages and opportunities. So thank you so much, and thank you for coming to this conference. Deeply appreciate it.
Thank you very much, James. Thanks to all of our presenters, shared a lot of really wonderful ideas and perspectives with us. Been a very enlightening session to continue the overall vibe of NASIG Autumn. We don't have too much time for Q&A. I do love seeing all of the chat that's already going on within Zoom, so please feel free to continue that during our break. But before we do break, let's see if we can get in another question or two. question from Flynn about who signs license agreements at your institution. You know, that structure can vary from place to place. Sorry, that would be a question for you, James. I apologize.
I've got signatory authority up to a certain extent, and then after a certain dollar amount, then it escalates, and there's different people at different levels, whatever that dollar amount might be. And as you can imagine, if you're getting into some of the bigger bundled package deals where you're talking about $1 million, that has to go all the way up to the top. So that's what I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have it staggered. Hilda, I saw you answered some questions within the Q&A. Did you have any responses that you wanted to share here live?
There was a question about using a separate queue in lib answers, and I do. I have my own ER queue, but everyone can see it. So I find that sometimes my public services colleagues will answer it, which makes it easier. And yeah, we used to have Iliad and a Creech's comment. We used to have Iliad, and it used to it used to be a general electronic service that would pop up all the time, and it doesn't now. Like since we've made the switch to Rapido, so I think that that's all confusing our students a little more, and that's kind of that's it.
Great, thank you. Well, it looks like we are unfortunately past time for this session, but thank you so much for those who have posted thoughts and comments and gotten the conversation going in chat in the Q&A section. Thank you so much to our wonderful presenters. Great talks, everyone. So grateful for your time and for sharing your perspectives and your expertise with us. NASIG Autumn will continue. We have 2 more presentations and a closing session that will begin at 4:10 p.m. Eastern. So see you shortly for a little more fun. Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth and Hannah. How are you?
Fine, how are you doing?
Good. Great to see you. Oh,
Thank you.
sorry. Did not have my video on. Um, Elizabeth, are you comfortable with going first this session?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. If you would like, feel free to go ahead and share your slides.
Okay, give me a second.
Sure. We still have a minute or two.
Now let me, whoops. Let me do, oh, I've got stuff blocking at the top. There's my slideshow from beginning, and now let me flip this. Can you see it?
So yeah, that's perfect. That's the full screen view. That's very nice and legible. Perfect.
Okay, good.
Great. So we have another minute or so. So once folks come back from break and our participant list has stabilized a bit, I'll introduce you and we can kick things off.
Okay, and if you want to keep track of the 15 minutes, I think I'm on topic. I've timed it, but you know how it goes when you're actually sitting in the chair.
Yeah, will do. Thanks.
I think it's been a very interesting conference so far.
Oh yeah, I have so many notes and the sessions have been fantastic.
They're
And I'm
very
very
interesting. I also like
ex-
the fact that you've done the pre-recorded ones too.
Mhm. Those are great too, especially with doing a single track conference. We wanted to have the pre-recorded sessions just in case maybe there was a block where the topics didn't really pique someone's interest. They could still, find something interesting to watch. So
Well, and given that, I mean, we're only doing afternoons because of course it's difficult with the time, all the time zones in the United States, that gives you a little more extra content too.
exactly. Yep. Yep. So we are at 4:10, and it looks like our number of participants has stabilized. Maybe a few more folks will be popping in. But for now, I'm happy to say welcome back to NASIG Autumn. We have one more session for medium presentations. So we have two 15-minute presentations with Q&A at the end. Please feel free to make use of the chat and Q&A features as y'all have been. You're probably sick of me saying it by now, but now I can't stop. So I'm very happy to kick things off by handing over to Elizabeth for her session on migrating digital theses and dissertations.
Hi, welcome to my session today. My name is Elizabeth McDonald. I work at the University of Memphis. I'm currently in the Government Publications Department, but the ETDs, which I'll call them that, have been my baby for quite a while. So as the title says, we were migrating from a locally created database, which I will refer to as homegrown, since that's what they call them here, to an established platform, which happens to be bpress. So we're going from what you can see on the left-hand side to the new thing that you're going to see on the right-hand side. And of course, with any migration, many of the steps that we go through are the same. It's just that coming from something that's homegrown presents some slightly different challenges to what is a similar process. So a little bit of background. As I say, this is a locally created system. It was done in 2010 with a committee that included the graduate school, a couple of us from the library, I was on it, and an individual from IT who actually created the entire system. It involved both of all of our master's degrees and the PhD, EDD, and our DMA, which is Doctorate of Musical Arts. This was designed as a complete student system from student submission to the graduate school, through the graduate school going back and forth to get it into the format they needed, and then being released to the system where the students and or the staff could search. In 2017, the graduate school decided to move the PhD proportion of this to the ProQuest system. After the process in the old system, they were having students submit to ProQuest, so it seemed logical to them to move the dissertations over. For some reason, they didn't think that master's theses could go to ProQuest. I think they were thinking under the old dissertation abstracts idea. So at this point, I'm not going to be talking about the ProQuest portion because we did wind up with like a bifurcated system to be migrating different theses and dissertations from different sources. So the first thing we did was we analyzed the data. And we were extraordinarily fortunate that the individual who had created and designed the system still worked with the university. If he had not, I cannot even begin to imagine how much more work it would have been. He was able to do a series of data extracts from the system for us that I then analyzed. What I talked about is how the data was stored in the old system, because it had been 2010 was quite a while ago. And so we had to look at which fields were used in the system and how the data was coming out. And the old system had previously had a canned extract system that I would use to extract data from and create MARC records. But this was a more comprehensive extract. But there were some problems with my extract in that the abstracts sometimes went through multiple levels on an Excel spreadsheet. So I was able to let him know in advance that these were issues so we could deal with those issues on the front end. A couple of things when we were working on this through the abstract, sometimes there were missing fields, and I had to go back and say, yes, we do want these fields in the abstract as well. We had to discuss a lot about how the embargoes were set up and functioning. I remembered what they were set up, but we had to get into the nitty-gritty of how they were actually functioning in our system. And a reminder that we had things set up so we had open access, university access only, and then things that were embargoed for a period of time, and things that were no access forever. We had some local fields. We had an ETD number, which I had used to put into our Sierra bibliographic records that we wanted to make sure migrated so I could get the information into the new information into our Sierra records. Our old system had used single sign-on, which meant that when the student signed on to it, all of the information from our banner system about their what degree they were getting, their major, their concentration, populated the fields for the graduate school, which was very nice. But those were unique fields that we needed to make sure we got out, because our resource and access and description, our reference department, actually use this information to help patrons who are looking to see dissertations in a particular field and concentration. But when we got information from the banner system, it also came out in abbreviations, which was its own set of issues. So after we got the extracts finalized, then we had to clean up the data that we were receiving. All of our abstracts, for some reason, came out with ampersand NBSP at the front of the text. We have no idea why. Rather than us having to clean it up manually, the individual doing the extract was able to do a cleanup for us. Also, for some reason, our URLs all came out with % signs in front of them and throughout various places in the URL. So he was able to clean those up as well. Those were two things that I kind of looked at and said, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. And as I had previously said, some fields were codes directly downloaded from the banner system. In talking with our reference department, they wanted these spelled out. They wanted it to say Doctor of Philosophy, not PhD. And they particularly wanted it with the majors and the concentrations not to be the the codes that banner used. So we had to convert all that to iReadable text. Then there were 100 titles that when the initial system was set up, they did not have any file name restrictions set up. So the file names that the students were setting up to be used caused a whole bunch of problems. And then after about 100 titles with problems, they put in the restrictions so that they weren't going to be having trouble with the file names. But because of that, 100 of the earlier titles that didn't have those restrictions all had to be loaded manually. The system just could not handle the strangeness that was going on with those file names. Most of our embargo titles also had to be loaded manually simply because there was a firewall, if they were still embargoed, that the system had to go through, and it couldn't get through the firewall. So we had to clean up that data as well. So all of that had to be done on our end. A lot of it were things that I was doing in cleaning up Excel spreadsheets. Then after we got the data cleaned up, we had to actually format it and get it into the correct manner for it to be loaded into the bpress system. So I then compared these extracts that we had from our old system to what B-Press was expecting. And of course, their data was sometimes in a different setup from ours. So we had to make sure that we were in the right format. I again reconsulted with the RAD desk and also was giving them updates as to what was going on, issues we were seeing in it, and some timeframes because this was a somewhat time-consuming process. As I said, the ETD numbers from the old system were very important. And because of that, I recognized that I wanted an ETD number system for this new data in BPress, because I wanted to have the same flexibility to be able to use that number to move data back and forth out of our bibliographic records. Initially, I talked to BPress and they said use this particular number. And the more I worked with the data, the less I liked that number. And so in consultation with our then head of digital initiatives, who is now an associate dean, we agreed we would actually I would put our own number in the system, and I just continued a number on from the old ETD number system because I wanted it to be in the metadata. Because whenever you migrate, if it's in the metadata, you can probably get it migrated, but if it's coming from somewhere else, you may not be able to migrate that forward. There were, and some of the differences, we had our data set up so we had a committee chair field and advisor fields. In BPress, they were all advisor fields, so we had to have them create a field for committee chair as a separate one. The major and concentration fields did not exist in BPress. They were used to getting a department field. So we had to have them create the major and concentration fields. And I had them also add what I called a mark field. And that is so as we move forward with this, I can put a yes in that field. It's not, excuse me, it doesn't display to the public, but it allows me to see which records have had bibliographic records created in our Sierra system and which ones have not. We also had to send a list of the correct field information for the degrees and the major and concentration fields, and this was for a vetting purpose. BPress, when you load records, there are certain fields that it checks against a list, and if the field isn't found, if the information in the field isn't found in the list, it's kicked out. So we had to make sure that was updated and get that information out of Banner and then check it across what was happening on campus. I'm sure that there are going to be changes in this moving forward. And given the way communication sometimes works on campus, I think we're going to probably find them when they get bounced out of the load system. And BPress had a couple of unique fields that we had not didn't have any data for, and one that was the department. One of the others, they have a unique field of data type that we had not encountered before in the way in which that was going to be used. So we had to work with those. We then wound up with issues with embargoes again. As I said, we had university use only and not released for use. And the individual we worked with at BPress had not encountered those two scenarios before. At least that's what we were told. So we had to work very closely with them to figure out a way in which these embargoes would work in the new system and how it would sort by that. So I know that our the digital initiative librarians worked very closely with BPress, and we figured this out. Again, when you have embargoes involved, it's really critical to get this information right. So I'm glad we were able to do that. One of the things with that is we relied on one of the BPress fields, and I am thinking as we move forward, we're going to want to put some conversations with our interlibrary loan librarian that we may need to begin to put some iReadable notes in there. Originally, I wanted them and was talked out of it, and now I'm thinking I want the iReadable notes in again. So then the final steps. The thing that we were able to do is BPress had a test section for us. And so we were able to load the results, see how it was behaving, and then reload. And BPress had to literally manually wipe out well, not manually, but they had to wipe out the test database several times while we made sure we got everything working the way we wanted it to work in all the displays. Currently, all data from the old system is in the Digital Commons, and all of our Sierra records have been updated to reflect that and the new ETD number. I went ahead and tried to update within OCLC records globally by downloading using MarcEdit, the same tool, to get and got all the data in, and I could not get it to globally update into OCLC. I had long conversations with the technical services people in OCLC and to find out it couldn't be done, at least at this point. So in talking with our IT people, they established a redirect. So anyone that is looking at a record in First Search and clicks on our URL will be and gets sent to our old system. It'll be redirected into our new digital commons. This was a really good, efficient workaround. I do have some qualms about it simply because, you know, our old system is 10 to 11 years old. This new system, we're going to be, you know, we're going to be keeping electronic theses and dissertations into the future. And I do have a concern that somewhere along the line, someone's going to look at, oh, this is a really old system. It's not being used anymore, and go delete. And so I do have some concerns about ultimately getting our OCLC records updated. We can continue to make changes as needed. BPress is very responsive to this. And then this last thing, the graduate school backend data, that's an EEC. And the reason I put EEC is when I was listening to one of the presentations on Monday about the migration that they were, that the other school had been doing, I realized that all of our graduate school backend data has not been, to my knowledge, migrated anywhere. And right now we have access to that through the individual who designed it. But if he leaves, we will lose access to that. And I'm thinking that we need to have a conversation about archiving that somewhere. We have had need for it a couple of times when we've had because we have, with the greater exposure, we have had a couple of times we've found PDFs that wouldn't open, and we needed to go back in and have them check to see if the PDF just didn't migrate correctly, or if for some reason there was a problem and we did need that access. When we discovered that we were having problems with our PDFs, BPress did a crawl and was able to come up with a list of things that they thought might be problematic. So I was able to go through that list and make sure that everything was correct on that. But we still have had one that didn't work for some reason. And then other steps that I haven't covered in this presentation. The ProQuest back files from when the graduate school in 2017 went over to using them have been loaded into our BPress system. They have the open access ones are updated in Sierra. The embargoed ones are not updated in Sierra yet. There were some stumbling blocks with that in trying to get the XML files to work. One of the results of our moving to the digital commons is the graduate school decided to move after conversations, and they're realizing that they could put master's theses into ProQuest. They decided to move all of their master's processing into the ProQuest database as well. We are currently working on this switch to ProQuest processing and getting that all ironed out with ProQuest and our graduate school right now. And I don't know how I'm doing with time. I probably talked way too fast, but thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm here to help later on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You've done so much, a really impressive project. Last but certainly not least, we have Hannah. Are you ready to share your screen for your presentation? Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hannah Tarver. I'm from the University of North Texas, and I am going to be talking today about some work we've been doing to implement a serial database in our digital collections. Oh, sorry. So first, some brief local context. So we have just over 3.7 million items in our system right now across 3 public interfaces. About 200,000 of those are still hidden and waiting for metadata, but most of them are publicly visible. All of our items live in a single administrative system. So this is the backend editing system, and you can see that there are the materials from all the different sites are in there. And then our public interfaces are essentially the same, but just with different branding. This is a homegrown system that we built in-house and maintain in-house, and we use a single metadata schema for everything. It's all sort of the same across the board. We have 37 different resource types in our system right now, and a number of them include things that are entirely or largely serial type items, including newsletters, newspapers, yearbooks, also lots of reports, course catalogs, whole range of serials. In terms of the number of titles per record, I just included this because I think it's a little interesting. So we have just over 1.5 million items that have a single serial title per record, and then some of our records have multiple serial titles. And then similarly for series titles, we have 770,000 items that have a single series title. And we actually use series kind of flexibly. So some records have a lot of series titles. So one reason that I'm mentioning series as well is that in a lot of our interfaces, we treat serial and series titles somewhat equivalently because we're assuming that users may or may not know how those differ explicitly. So for example, in the search results, users have the option to search or filter by series or serial title, and that displays a searchable list then of all those titles together. There's also the option to see the comprehensive list of titles, which looks like this, and it's all of the series and serial titles together in a list for people who want to browse. At the item level, since we describe things as individual issues, we do have this banner at the top of the item record that lets people find all of the other items in that serial and clearly displays information about that. We do the same for the primary series title in cases where those exist. Okay, so why are title records important, given that we have this infrastructure already? So first, of course, it's difficult to describe and index titles. So one thing that we do have in the digital collections is, collection descriptions and groups of materials as collections. But as you might imagine, collections do not always have a one-to-one relationship with serial titles for all sorts of reasons. We work with a lot of archival collections that may have one or more serials mixed with non-serial materials or multiple serials, basically all of the scenarios. So if we want to include information specifically about a title, that starts getting complicated very quickly. Also, as I'm sure many of you are even more aware than I am, titles change over time. So we also have all the various scenarios where titles change, sometimes frequently, or split, or merge, or get published in parallel, but keep their separate titles and volumes and issue numbers and make life interesting. And also, of course, serials are complicated. And again, I'm sure you guys know even more situations than I do, but this was just a brief list of the many issues that tend to come up. And one thing that we've been dealing with is situations where we have multiple standard identifiers or no standard identifiers, because that can make it difficult to get information about a particular title. Also, another reason that we want to keep series titles in mind is that we do work with a lot of government documents and other situations where the series titles can be significant for various reasons for particular user groups, and they don't have the same kind of unifying identifier the way that a serial record would have. So all of these various things create lots of issues that make it difficult for us to represent information in a way that is sometimes helpful. All right, so how do we approach our title database. We created a Django app that has been integrated into our system, and it looks sort of like this. And from at the beginning, we automatically imported or generated title records for newspapers when we had an LCCN for them. So we do have this system generated view that can tell us serial titles that are in our system that do not have a title record, or that our system can't match with a title record. But there are various reasons that happens. So you can see in some cases there's different uses of identifiers. There are multiple LCCNs or OCLC numbers. So anything that is not a newspaper, or that had discrepancies, or that didn't have an LCCN, all of those title records we've had to create manually. And since I work with the non-newspaper materials, basically all of the non-newspaper serial records I've been creating individually. Okay, so this is what the title record interface looks like. And most of this information is really similar to the traditional cataloging for serial title records, which is why we were able to import a lot of that from LCC records. So the fields that are bold are the ones that are required, but you can see we pulled a lot of the information, like the frequency list. That's, I believe, the same as the language that's used in traditional cataloging, and all of the information is essentially the same. Then we also include like the years, languages, locations that are important. We have a really general sense of topical categories, which we aren't using a ton yet, but we might at some point. Also funding sources, which especially for our newspapers is really important to represent, and which systems the serial is in. And then we have all of these options to include additional information. So alternate titles that we want to be searchable, alternate identifiers besides the primary OCLC or LCCN, notes, and then related titles. So clicking on those will expand that information. And just like before, the information about preceding and succeeding titles uses the same sorts of language as traditional cataloging. And then we have a search box that will let us automatically relate a title record to another existing title record in our system, which is really useful, except that the other title record already has to exist. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. So that is sort of the information that's included, and overall it's not a ton of information, but it's all of the sort of basics about the title. So what does it look like when we put it into our user interface? So when users look at the sort of browse by title, it'll now show the most recently added title records, and then you can see at the top here, we have options to look at curated titles, which is any title that has a title record, and the legacy interface, which is all series and serial titles together, like I showed you before. So as an example, this is all of the curated titles that are in the portal. You can see there's a lot of newspapers, and there's over 2,000 titles. And then curated titles in the digital library, there's only 46, because we have almost no newspapers in the digital library. So these are pretty much all manually created records for non-newspapers. So this is an individual title record, and you can see that some of the information is sort of broken out to display in various ways, and then some information is automatically integrated into sort of text descriptions that tries to provide a little bit of context. Sometimes the grammar gets a teeny bit weird, but it does try to sort of provide some information for users if they go to this title record to understand what the information means. And then there's some options over at the left to find more information. And then if you scroll down, you can actually see a breakdown of information about the particular title and the items that are in the title. So one option that was over at the left was to look at dates. So this is a different newsletter. I wanted to show some more options, but you can see there's like a heat map that shows where or when we have issues from. And then you can actually go down and see individual days. And this is a different title that's a daily. I wanted to show what that looks like so you can really see where there are gaps and where we have lots of issues. All right, so to kind of summarize what we are doing here, oops, sorry. So one thing that was really important was to make sure that when we created a title record, we would actually assign a unique UNTID. So that gets appended to the URL. It creates a permanent unique URL that we can then use for various functions in our system. But also the important thing about this is that in situations where a title doesn't have a standard OCLC or LCCN or other identifier, we can add the UNT assigned identifier to the individual records, and then those records all get aggregated into the title record. So it lets us create records for things that don't already have records elsewhere. And especially for a lot of the cultural heritage materials, that gets really important. It also gives us a lot of flexibility to decide if there are specific things we want to represent differently. So for example, this particular serial was handled as multiple OCLC records because it had a uniform title with the agency name, and then the agency name changed frequently. And even though there are a lot of good reasons to catalog the title that way at the time it was being published, we decided that, especially because we had a large set over time already, that it might make more sense for users to have fewer records that combined all of the reports in that serial, and then to just represent all of the information from the different OCLC records, so that it's still searchable, it's still included, but we have some flexibility to say that in our system, it's all one title. So these records all have those sort of standard descriptive fields, and you saw there weren't a ton of them, but then it gives us some options to break out information. You can see this one has a publication type, and it has some other notes and information. For newspapers and yearbooks, the title that displays automatically includes the location and dates, similar to the standard newspaper titles, to help with disambiguation, since people kept using the same titles for things. So far, we're not doing that for our other serials at the moment, but that could change in the future. And then we also have the option to include longer descriptions in cases where that's important. So some of our newspapers have essays attached to them because they were part of the Chronicling America project and the research has already been done. So that will give us some options to include additional information, although we probably won't use it very frequently. And then in terms of ongoing development, so we're using this information in a lot of ways. We have this KBART feed, which I know looks super exciting, but that will allow us to expose this information so that it can be indexed in other databases and added to discovery layers. So that's something that will happen later. We are building out this JSON interface so that at some point we'll be able to integrate situations where people can see the next issue or the previous issue, but we're still sort of building that out. So I mentioned before that we have the banners at the top of the page for serial and series titles. And then we also have, anytime there's a series or serial title in the record, it creates a link to the other issues. We haven't decided how we're going to represent title records in item records yet, because we probably want to keep this functionality since not every series and serial title will have a title record. And so it will be really important to maintain some of that functionality. But at some point we will want to integrate title records into item records as well. So overall, we feel like this has been a good start. We've kept things relatively simple and in line with other standards. Creating unique IDs has been important. We're still working out additional functionality, including things like OAI feeds. It does require some work to add records manually, but overall, we feel like it's really flexible and fills in a gap that we've had to be able to describe and index and use titles, especially as I mentioned before, we have so many series and serial titles that there's definitely a need. So overall, hopefully this is a good example that might be useful for others.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's an incredible project. Yeah, that's fantastic work. Both of you, Hannah and Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing your projects with us. If anyone has questions, please continue putting them in the chat. I have one. Elizabeth's comment about the embargoed content for the theses and dissertations made me wonder if that's an issue for you as well, Hannah, if there are some items like yearbooks or materials that you want to make sure you have internal records for, but maybe don't want to be as visible. I just was curious if that's an issue for you.
Yeah, we actually have a mechanism in our system to create an embargo. So basically the metadata record is public, but the public can't view the records. And then we enter a date and it automatically changes to whichever access we preset. But that is something we've had to deal with for a lot of the, the university content, the same for ETDs as well as other materials.
Sounds like your system is very well designed to accommodate that so easily. I'm like, oh, that sounds so cool. So we do have a couple questions in the chat I'm seeing so far for Elizabeth. Did the graduate school discuss the move to ProQuest with the library?
Discussed? No. We found out about it. We have loaded the back files, but no, there is a new head of graduate school, and I hope things are going to be moving in a very positive direction in the future.
Great, thank you. Another question for you, Elizabeth. Regarding the shift to ProQuest, will the dissertations and theses continue to be loaded into BPress?
Yes, they will. We've loaded all the back files. This is something that we're currently working on, working with the graduate school and getting all of that set up. I found out in a conference about a month ago that there's some new stuff coming out that should speed up some of that process. But yes, the plan is to have everything in the digital commons.
Excellent. It's nice when it's all organized in one place. It's the dream, right? A question from Deja. What's fully restricted in dissertations?
We do have some theses and dissertations which there is no access to. Usually we do have students that work on things that are trying to get a patent, or they may be working on proprietary information as part of a study or something, and it can't be released to the public ever. And that's what that means.
Great explanation. And do you have also content where it's it can be shared, but it is after a certain period of time? It's like 5 years after graduation, or it's kind of staggered, or?
We do have things under embargoes. There are some, it's the old way. I don't remember all of the details from the older, but the student could choose, and moving forward, typically it's like a year or 2 years, or they have the ability to set it 25 years out if they want. And hopefully when we move forward, we'll be able to have that flexibility in the system with ProQuest, and hopefully keep ProQuest in line with the institutional repository so we don't have 2 sets of dates.
Yeah, having consistency there. I can see that being critical and delicate. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Keeping an eye out for, here's a question for Hannah from Steve. How do you feel about a proprietary local system going forward in terms of long-term accessibility, et cetera? Just curious to know if that is something you all have considered, and if so, would enjoy hearing your perspective on that.
Yeah, so we actually built our system in 2009. So it is pretty long-standing. We also have an entire team of developers who maintain and update it. We honestly have no interest in moving to something proprietary because then we would not have the same choices. We did, 5 or 6 years now, we did a trusted repository checklist. We've been doing all of the succession planning. We've been doing all of the, all of the documentation to prove that we have the infrastructure, the funding, the personnel in place to maintain the system indefinitely. And we very much consider that this is a permanent system. There's a trust to maintain funding. There's a plan in place to ensure that we have consistent technology updates. We are really happy with our system. And every time I speak with folks, I realize how lucky we are that we have all of these resources and the ability to make changes very easily. So I honestly don't think that because of the situation that we're in, we would never consider a proprietary system. I don't think, because then we would have fewer options.
Great question, Steve, and excellent answer, Hannah. Yeah, as you were talking about the system, I was very impressed by the flexibility yet intuitive design. It's not flexibility that seems it's cost a lot of, like, well, you can make it happen, but you have to do all of these things in the correct order as long as there's a full moon, Great.
Yeah, we're incredibly lucky, and I appreciate our developers every day.
Yes, they've done a wonderful job, and it's great to see that collaboration as well, where the talent all comes together to make something really cool happen. So yeah, many thanks to you both for wonderful presentations. We have just our final session left to go, but just wanted to say thank you again. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your work with us and give us a lot of wonderful things to think about going forward. So thank you very much. Now I will try and share my screen. See if that works as I hope. Okay, apologies everyone. My cat is getting restless, so you may hear some crying in the background. I promise he's actually fine. He has kibble, he has water, he's just grumpy. This is very bittersweet to be at the end of NASIG Autumn. It's been such a wonderful conference. I'm so appreciative of all of the wonderful presentations, all of the wonderful conversations that we've heard in just a few days. I want to thank Benny Wickham, our wonderful vision speaker, for kicking us off with a great mindset, giving us things to think about throughout the conference. So many thanks, all of our gratitude to our live and pre-recorded presenters. It's a lot of work to put on a presentation, and we really appreciate all of the generosity of you sharing your projects, your ideas, your expertise with us. Yeah, it's just been a very stimulating conference. Thanks to you all. To our NASIG Autumn attendees for your really great questions, your engagement, sharing links to photos and responding to requests for help or providing the link at the right time. All of those wonderful points of transaction and interaction, I should say, really enrich the entire experience. So thank you so much for being here. I'd like to express appreciation for the NASIG board, the communications committee, and the registrar. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make an event like this happen. And this was our first year doing 2 separate conferences. So there was a lot of figuring things out as we were going. And I'm just so appreciative of all the support, all the commitment to this organization and to the community. So many thanks to you all. Special shout out to the virtual conference committee. Thank you so much to Steve Oberg, Melissa Hart-Cantrell, Matthew Ragucci, Kathy Mason. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I thank you so much for your time and your enthusiasm and commitment to NASIG and NASIG Autumn. We hope that you will stay in touch with us through some means, whether you decide to become a member if you aren't already. We'd of course love to have you. If you are a member and are not yet a part of a committee, that's an option as well. So please, feel free if you're interested in being a part of the committees that you've heard about, or just want more information about what opportunities there are to be a part of this organization. While NASIG Autumn is coming to a close, we do have webinars frequently, thanks to the Continuing Education Committee. So we hope that you will join us for upcoming webinars. And another resource that I wanted to spotlight very quickly are our core competency documents. If you are embarking on a job change, if you're new to the profession, if you're getting your MLIS, please take a glance at the core competencies. They can be really valuable in outlining skills, resources that can help you if you're trying to get into an e-resources librarian position or work in scholarly communications. And they've been crafted by NASIG members. So a lot of work went into them, and I like to spread the word whenever I can. If you'd like to stay connected with us through social media, once again, these are our accounts and our handles. We hope to engage with you in these spaces as well if you would like. And then I'd also like to mention that we will be having our in-person conference in June 3rd through 7th. I apologize, at the opening session, I gave incorrect dates for this. Sincere apologies for that and any confusion I may have caused. But the 3rd through the 7th in June of 2024 is when we will be in Spokane. Please keep an eye out for the call for proposals, which will be coming from the Program Planning Committee very shortly. We're also still eagerly accepting any suggestions for workshops. So please reach out to PPC if you have any ideas or suggestions, or someone you'd like to volunteer to run a workshop during our in-person conference in June. Now that NASIG Autumn is almost at its end, please consider filling out our conference evaluation. This form link will also be sent in an email after the event. We do welcome your feedback, your thoughts. We always strive to make our events better and more useful to our attendees. We do have an incentive, if you will, to complete the survey. If you complete it, you will be entered into a drawing to receive a $50 gift card, which is, a nice little something. So please send us your feedback, your thoughts, your suggestions for what we might want to consider doing in the future. But thank you so much for just a tremendous conference experience. Thank you to our presenters, our attendees. Thank you to our volunteers for your outstanding work and your commitment to one another and to NASIG as an organization. It's a true honor to be a part of this, this wonderful space and to get to spend time with you all. 3 days has gone by really quickly, and I hope that we're able to spend time together in some capacity in the future. So with that, I will say have a wonderful day, and yeah, thank you for being here.